Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos and I've never been described by the Sherman brothers as super callous, pugilistic, sexy and precocious. A diddle diddle diddle, diddle ah. Well, one of the things we keep returning back to on Musical Talk is this interesting idea that musical theatre has, probably since the 1940s, diverged from what was itself popular music. I think it's arguable that from certainly the First World War until the Second World War, what was popular in the hit parade, the musical charts of the period, i.e. what was popular song, was as much informed by musical theatre as from other sources such as Tin Pan Alley. Certainly Gershwin was writing the pop songs of his era, and he was writing them for the most part for musical theatre. But since Rodgers and Hammerstein and Oklahoma, there's been a divergence. And I think this is widely acknowledged. You don't now go to musical theatre to hear the pop of your era. But that doesn't mean that the musical theatre today doesn't completely avoid borrowing from the popular music scene of the era in which it was written. It might be 30 years too late, but at least Hamilton is trying with its rap. And perhaps a better British example, of 10 years ago admittedly, was Closer to Heaven, which had a score by the Pet Shop Boys, who still had currency in the popular charts of the period. Well, another pair of writers who are trying to rekindle the heart of pop into modern musical theatre are Leoe Mercer and Stephen Hyde. And if those names ring some kind of a bell with you, it might well be because they had a big hit last year with The Marriage of Kim K. They've also written various other musicals, but one of their big, unique selling points, trademark, is their determination to make modern musicals using modern pop. Can the cutting edge of popular music make it into the cutting edge of modern musical theatre? Well, it's a very good question. And they're certainly trying, because in London now, and about to go on tour across the country, is their latest piece, Guy, a new musical. It's an attempt to be a universal story about the dating game and about what might be called body fascism, certainly when it comes to online dating apps and how people, unfortunately, tend to look at the physical rather than anything else. Certainly at the beginning. And it was about this show that I sat down with Leoe and Stephen to have a long chat about, well, not just their productions, but also their ambitions for themselves and for the genre in which they're working. So a little bit later in the programme, we'll hear a medley of songs from The Marriage of Kim K. But first, before we go into the interview I've been talking about, let's hear some clips of some of the songs from Guy, a new musical.
Assault you with your own image. Judgment calls from cool magazines. You push yourself to the limits. Hard days, hard weeks, hard times here. Hard days, hard weeks, hard times here. Dieting yourself to depression. Trying to stay away from your thoughts, dying from the weight of the pressure. Hard days, hard weeks, hard times a year. Hard days, hard weeks, hard times a year. Shut down your fantasy self, struggling and struggling. Someone else, open your eyes and open your mind. Unlucky fools, you're still not beautiful. Bodies of your idols are Bible. You starve yourself until you look right. Scared skeleton, they're suicidal. Oh, shut it down, your fantasy self.
Hiding from the police state, color fucking peacock. What is tonight's soulmate? Fella had a shell of shot. I search, I find, what am I looking for? I really don't mind. Get on the dance floor, stand up, miss loose end. Hands up if you want a pitch bend. Gimme my new sex friend. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Gimme my new sex friend. Whoa, 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 whoa. I wasn't meant what's debonair. Just wasn't me in the circle square. But for the real men out there, bow down to your queen and dance with me. Chant all the real men out there. Shout all the real men out there. Stamp all the real men out there. Bow down to your queen and dance with me.
He asks about my day.
He shares his last 5 years.
He asks, would I choose to be gay?
He says he loves that he is queer.
He brings up his politics.
So he changes the conversation quick.
He says, where'd you wanna go?
He's like anywhere, everywhere, but the truth is, it's less about where than who
We click like a light switch,
love quick as an algorithm.
the rhythm of the heartbeat. Boy, let's you and I meet. We click like a light switch,
Love quick as an algorithm.
the rhythm of the heartbeat.
Boy, let's meet. The perfect conversation, it's straight away nice.
I don't know what it is, but you're just my type.
I've hidden away my face, but we've broken the ice.
It's easy to imagine you take part in my life.
Musical talk.
So I am Leoe Mercer,
And I am Stephen Hyde.
and we have a show coming up called Guy, a new musical.
And it is a new musical, in fact. It's actually subtitled that, isn't it? So,
Yeah, it's brand new.
So tell me about Guy. It's on in London at the moment, going on tour.
We started it back in November, so it's a very quick process for a musical. And the idea behind it is to try and capture what it's like to be young and gay at the moment. There's a lot of stories which we find in the gay world which took place already a couple of decades ago, and time travels fast in terms of social change. So we wanted to capture this particular moment in an interesting way, and that's what Guy is about.
And I think from a musical perspective, I think we're just taking what we've done in previous shows, especially The Marriage of Kim K, where we're using contemporary pop music in a theatrical context and really trying to build upon that sound world.
Right then, so Guy the musical. I want to draw something from your advertising immediately then.
Sure.
It says, sometimes sexy, always real.
Yes.
Sometimes sexy is relatively easy to do if you're not me, everyone else can do it. Always real is a very interesting thing to say in relation to a theatrical event. There is something de-realising, new word, about theatre automatically, I think. So what does always real mean in this context?
I think when we create something, we want people to watch it and say, yeah, that is like my real life. Theatre can, and in many cases should, tell a fantastical story, something that takes you out. But there's another sort of theatre which you watch and you feel this sense of self-recognition. You feel as though that is me there on stage. And I think we all need those moments where we identify and we feel as though we're not alone in the things that we experience.
And I think in musical theatre, there's often this sort of baggage that comes with it, that we expect heightened realism, partly to do with just the medium. But I think we're really wanting to bring a very truthful story into this musical context.
I'm going to ask you some terms which you may find absolutely appalling, but obviously in broadest drama rather than musical, although I don't make a distinction actually. People sometimes make the difference between high drama and soap opera, and I've heard it argued that soap opera is more speech marks real, but that's also a shorthand for something that's not actually true. You're not talking, I think, about soap opera here though, are you? Which is incident without meaning. You're talking, I think, about... Well, is it emotional heart? Is it? It's interesting that you said that you wanted to recognise, or you wanted people to recognise themselves on stage. I'm interested, are you talking about their own personal experiences, which is obviously very micro, or are you talking more in the recognising the context in which they live their lives themselves, or we live our lives ourselves? I'm not distancing myself from this circumstance.
I think there's a lot of just human emotions that we experience every day, and there's some which are very deep and very eternal, but there are some which the society around us brings out of us. So there are certain emotions like procrastination is an interesting one. I've got no idea what the history of procrastination is, but it's one that's very talked about in our culture. So somehow this is a trait that 21st century society brings out of the human beings that live in it. And so that's a thing we might want to put on stage, and people will recognise that actually this is something that I live in my life, and when I'm watching Kiss Me Kate, I'm not going to see an exploration of procrastination in the same way as you might in a contemporary exploration.
That's very true. Very well put, Leoe.
Kiss Me Kate is great.
Yeah, it's a very different show.
It's very,
isn't it?
yeah.
I see you're drawn to every show that begins with K, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Natural affinity.
Exactly.
So I'd like to explore the dichotomy, though, a little bit more, the macro and the micro here. I mean, obviously, it's while talking about specific experiences which people can sort of identify. Procrastination is such an interesting one, because I don't think I'd spotted that myself, because I am a middle-aged man, and therefore 20th century in origin. Not millennial, so sorry.
We are 20th century in origin. Just
That's true.
Yeah, but I suspect you only put your toes in the water.
True.
But the micro and the macro, that it's a traditional, once again, a dramatic way of dealing with things, which is to take one person's story or a small context, but try and draw out some universal truths from that.
Sure.
You're trying to do that.
100%. I think so. Guy, for example, is on a basic level, it's just a love story like any other love story. The things that change are just the specifics. And there's a line at the end which I'm really kind of proud of, and it's a very cheesy line, but I think it's also got something smart, which is
the rules have changed, but the aim's the same.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
That's originally the last line of the show was the rules have changed, but the aim's the same, which is this kind of traditional musical theatre line, which is, everything's still the same. But then we switched it around, it was the aim's the same, but the rules have changed. And I think that notion of progression and trying to kind of capture the way that universal love story actually has a very specific form right now is really interesting.
And you said immediately that it's a gay piece, but how universal are you wanting that to be? Because you've also said it's the same. It's described as a rom-com.
Yeah.
And we have in our heads, when we think of rom-coms, I'm afraid Hollywood has rather damaged the concept there, but that is the idea that we have rolling around, or at least it's one I've got. Well, let me ask you the question. Could you make this... Would it work as a lesbian rom-com? Would it work as a heterosexual rom-com? So there are... You're nodding, by the way. Which,
yes, 100%.
It definitely would, yeah.
So it just happens in this case to be contextual.
Yeah, I think we wanted to create a love story that love doesn't have to be specific. And there was basically a rom-com a couple of months ago called Love, Simon, which had that same... The tagline was, everybody deserves a great love story. And what was... Even though it was very kind of commercial and simplistic on one level, the kind of revolutionary thing about it was that it managed to tell a Hollywood story, but with gay characters. And I think there's something similar, hopefully, going on here. It's interesting because, if you don't mind me saying, Stephen is actually straight.
Yeah.
Ooh, I've read about people like you.
I know. So I'm the gay one, he's the straight one. But I think we wanted to create something which we could both believe in as a love story.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not a show about coming out. It takes, I think, the gay community on a sort of face value, and then looks at issues that we deal with, whether we're straight or whether we're bisexual or homosexual, whatever. So yeah, it's certainly, the story speaks to me, and it has throughout the development process.
So the sexual spectrum itself is not actually really what this is about. It just happens.
No, exactly. It happens that the characters are all gay, but we're just taking that for granted, and we then look at other issues on top of that.
Yeah, I think the word gay doesn't appear until like the very, very end, because it's just not. It's not about being gay. It's about being human and alive right now.
I think that's rather splendid. I mean, there are a few musicals where characters are just gay, and they're central characters, although not always relationship stories. Title of Show is one that comes to mind immediately, of course. But they are still relatively few and far between. But I also like the fact that the reason that's so successful, and I hope the guy is as well, is because actually there's a bigger story going on.
Yeah.
The fact they're gay is entirely irrelevant, apart from one or two shrimp gags, I think. There are, there's not that much that absolutely roots that in the gay world.
Sure.
Yeah. So, how did you come to make Guy? What you said it came around fairly swiftly.
It did come around very swiftly. Actually, the writing of the songs for the show,
which is your bag.
Yes. Well, of course, Leoe does the lyrics.
This morning, I'm really proud because we were writing a song, and it didn't have an introduction, and Stephen went off for a few minutes, and he came back to find that I'd gone to the computer where we write, and added the introduction. And I was surprised because you liked it.
Musical.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
did, yeah, but
You
you're
liked
not meant to say that.
My plan is to secretly worm my way.
You're
into
slowly
music.
going to start composing everything. Yeah, I was just going to say that we were writing a bunch of songs together back in October, and they weren't for any particular project, but I went away for a month, and then Leoe came up with the idea for Guy, and then wove a lot of those songs into a narrative.
You've
which-
almost jukeboxed your own
Exactly.
work.
Exactly.
Is that right? That is
That's
exactly right.
exactly what we've done, yes. So a lot of the songs started their life not as part of a gay musical. We just were wanting to write some contemporary pop songs.
Yeah, but
actually,
I guess-
just as a kind of...
But the
just-
word was also honest. I think we were trying to just like express ourselves. We'd had this big tour, and we were feeling just like emotionally, lots of different emotions, and we wanted to sit down and just pick them all out and have a song about that. So when
Explore who you were and where you were.
Exactly, yeah.
Presumably following the success of Kim K.
Exactly.
Actually, because you had a big year last year and it sort of culminated, did it not, at Edinburgh?
Yeah.
So October, November is exactly when A, you should be having a rest, and B, having a bit of a,
so we had no intention of
an
writing.
analysis, yes.
We have another musical, which is the musical that we were meant to be doing this year, and then this just happened, and we were like, okay, let's do it. So
Jump the
Yeah,
queue. And I
exactly.
know Q is
Q,
also one
yeah,
of your
exactly.
previous works. So.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's interesting. So you were trying, once again, it's this idea about speech marks being real then, this idea that actually you were sort of, a post-mortem sounds very negative, but you were doing this kind of analysis of yourselves.
Yes.
Forensic, maybe is a better term.
No, it's a good
Though
way of
often
putting
one
it.
is part of the other quite often. A forensic investigation of, as I say, who you were, but more importantly, where you were at that time. Which presumably you felt was obviously going successfully, but you did feel between the two of you, you were touching on your own truths.
Exactly.
Because, I mean, forgive me, self-honesty is not a common thing. How easy is that for you in a working collaborative environment?
Oh, well, musically, it's always very ambiguous. So I think it's very difficult sometimes to know when you're emulating something or when you're doing something that's really coming from within, without sounding too cheesy.
No, I mean, it's a truism, but it's not a truism that people observe enough. But
Yeah.
actually, sentiment is very often, certainly in a Disney film, for example, is an emulation. That's a very good word of a real sincere feeling. Whereas
Yeah.
actually, in some way, actually being able to tap a genuine emotion
Yeah, exactly.
is much harder, and certainly then being able to manifest that into a thing that speaks outwardly.
Absolutely.
Even harder again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was talking with someone a few months ago about being new and true, because what Leoe and I want to do is we want to do stuff that sounds really fresh and really contemporary, but also that's not a gimmick, and that we're being true to ourselves along the way. So I think musically, for me, it's always tricky. But what about for you?
I definitely agree with that. I think before I was doing musicals, I was a poet, which is, I think, in its own way, just like the art of self-reflection and expression of that. And so I think that makes sense as a progression. I think one of my stronger elements as a lyricist is probably more the expression of feeling than drama, which I'm trying to learn a lot about at the moment. I feel like all I want to do really is just put my emotions out there in the world and say, do you feel this too? And I assume that if I feel something, I'm not the only one, but it's almost like each song is a hypothesis of whether that is actually shared.
You've been successful so far, haven't you?
Yeah, I think so.
You
Although the
recognise
marriage of
emotion in each other.
Yeah, true. Because I think we're very close friends, so I think that we have no trouble in the writing room just being very honest.
Now, that's very interesting. Well, I'm going to ask you a question which I'm sure you've been asked before, and it's in a way feels like a trite question, and yet I do think it's relevant, which is actually to start as a poet and then move to a lyricist is actually not the same thing at all.
Not at all.
How difficult has it been for you to make the transition? And do you ever find yourself falling back into your poetical ways?
I think the difficult thing is especially as a contemporary poet, because if you are a contemporary poet, rhyme and rhythm aren't your friends. You're taught to do this very blank verse type thing, whereas suddenly you're working with Stephen and I have to start thinking and trusting rhyme and rhythm. So I think one thing that we often find is Stephen writes a melody and I have a thought I really want to say, so I kind of just push it onto the melody and force you to change your melodies, because I'm not somebody who naturally thinks in terms of rhythm. But I think that tends to work out fine, because often I'll make the melodies more interesting.
Yeah,
True,
absolutely.
false?
Yeah, sometimes.
Well, how does it work in reverse then? Yes. So for your circumstances, how do you find the meshing, I suppose? Is it because in a way music does provide a framework for lyrics, if that's the order in which you do it?
Yeah.
And, how do you make
I think it's
How do you
great.
do that?
I think it's great because I think the most comfortably I work by writing a melody first and then having lyrics put onto it. But as Leo is suggesting, in writing with Leoe, often that gets changed during the writing process. But I think that's really good, and I think it's for me it's good practice to set music to text. I also think Leo's right that sometimes the melody changes for the better. That's not always the case, but often it makes me go in a different direction, which was somewhere I wasn't going to be going, but it actually sounds fresher sometimes. So I definitely enjoy it, even if it's hard work at times.
I tell myself that it's again through the honesty thing, that if your aim is to say honest thoughts in your lyrics, then there's actually only there's a much more limited amount of things you can say than if you're just coming up with cliched lyrics. So if I come up with a turn of phrase which I think actually says the thing I want to say, then I'm going to be much more obsessive about the melody changing, unless I feel as though the melody is, again, that sort of honest melody that can't change. But I think it's because you value a particular turn of phrase to express what you need to say.
But I think we're quite good at balancing that. When I feel very strongly about a particular melody, or you feel very strongly about a particular lyric, I think we're quite good at balancing.
I think so, because we have definite songs that begin as lyrics or that begin as melodies, and yeah, I think we can.
So what you're describing here is a successful and fruitful collaboration.
Absolutely, which is 100% lovely at all times. Yeah.
Really, good lord. No Gilbert and Sullivan carpet quarrels for you.
Yeah.
Obviously, so taking us back to the creative steps of this piece, Guy, you've created some songs of the moment, in the moment, one might say. Then you've found a way of, or rather, a story has coagulated in your mind, which works very well within the...
It's joining the dots,
yes,
essentially.
Exactly. It is the context for the songs, ironically, then. Did that land fully form in
Not at all.
No? Okay.
There were probably maybe 5 songs that I decided on 5 of the songs that we wrote did a good rough joining of the dots, and then we wrote more, which filled it all in.
But did you have your idea of where the story was? I mean, how the narrative then, in that sense? Did you feel that the narrative had reached what it was more or less going to be?
At the time, I thought.
Or was there still? Oh no! But at the time, how good? Right? Okay. That means no then.
At the time, I thought, this is easy. This is going to be one of those easy stories to tell, which just falls into place. And then I did my first draft, and I showed it to Stephen. And then after discussing it with you, it just completely changed, and the characters changed, and the plot structure changed. And then I think since then it's been through 4 or 5 other drafts.
So this is the collaboration again, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, because I'm quite musical, and I like suggesting things about your music, but you have a lot of interest in writing books and plot structures, so you'll have a lot of impact on the story that I'm telling.
Exactly, yeah. No, we definitely do have a hand in each other's... let's finish that sentence. In each other's...
Your timing is impeccable.
Remits, yeah.
Well, you've got to have for true collaboration, you've got to have at least some working understanding of each other's area.
Exactly.
I mean, otherwise it's impossible to do.
I think we're very good at the closeness. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We always joke that Leo backseat composes, but Leo also listens to a lot of music. So even if he's not sort of helping me rework a certain song I've written, he's pointing me in the direction of other influences, which is always really kind of nice from a collaborator.
We both agree that I have better music taste than you.
We don't both agree that.
It's an odd thing to agree on about oneself if it's not the positive.
Exactly, and I don't agree on that for the record. But
So, can I ask you a question then about influences? Because that's a very interesting thing to raise, because you've been talking very strongly about contemporary music and pop for this particular show in particular. But of course you do have a finger in historic musical forms. In fact, your previous show, the Marriage of Kim K, is in some senses, and you must tell if I'm wrong here, a kind of fugue, is it not? Musically as well as narratively.
Exactly. That's
about 3 couples and 3 musical stars, which then meshes until you get this sort of crescendo at the end, which is the thing that sort of knocks everyone's spots off, which is ideal, by the way, because obviously it happens at the end of a show and everyone goes off and writes their reviews immediately after. I'm looking at structure. But to have that kind of knowledge and make that work, you know, is contemporary then, this is the question I suppose where I'm coming up to, and it's the question for the two of you, is contemporary the ignoring of history, or is it the development of history in musical and narrative terms? Discuss, show your work.
You go first. That's fine.
I mean, I definitely think it's the development of. I think that both of us have a lot of love for things in the past. I think we just think that the best way for things in the present to be are such that they don't show that knowledge on the surface. And the step for me that I didn't mention between poet and lyricist was librettist for operas. And so before I met Stephen, I'd started working on essentially jukebox operas where I took, say, music by Purcell and threaded various lesser-known things together and told stories by that. And I think that when you kind of, with the Marriage of Figaro, the The Marriage of Kim K, before Stephen started working on it as a composer, was me rewriting the libretto to it. And spending time with not just old musicals, but old operas, which are essentially musical theatre, but a long time ago, I think is just entirely... There's a layer of my brain which is filled with that. Yeah. So I think that's important.
I love the idea, by the way, of Purcell as the writer.
Yeah, I mean...
Because I think of him as a composer, but you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw Julius Caesar in German recently.
Oh, really?
It was marvellous. It'd been made contemporary,
Yeah.
whilst being true to its roots, and it was very interesting. And also then having that extra level of being in German, which is not a language I have, made it a sensory delight.
Yeah.
Although comprehensively, perhaps less so.
Well, no, I was just going to say that in response to that question, I think because history works quite cyclically. I think if you're taking your inspiration from very recent musical theatre, you're very unlikely to be going in a wholly original direction. And I think we take our cues from people in the past who have done something in a certain genre which no one else was doing in that genre. And so in that way, we'd like to take from history by bringing something complete from a completely exterior influence into a different tradition and just seeing how that comes together.
You mean, it's actually funny enough, it's that courtesy of it being historic. It gives you an extra step away so you know that it's already proven its worth and therefore you can develop something from it, whereas actually the musical theatre of the last 30 years is still yet to prove what its
So that's
legacy
also
is.
true, absolutely, yeah.
Also, there's something problematic with musical theatre in general, and I don't include you two gentlemen, but there is, as my colleague Tim Saywood on this programme, Musical Talk, often says, the latest musical theatre, in the West End at least, is always 30 years out of date. The idea that Hamilton is somehow groundbreaking in using rap is
absolutely
amazing to me, but that's considered modern.
Exactly. We feel like musical theatre really needs to play catch up.
Yes.
With the influences it's drawing upon.
At least 25 years.
But then we feel kind of like slightly imposter at times, because on the one hand we feel as though we're being quite progressive and forward thinking because we're doing something musical that we don't see being done. But on the other hand, musically, we probably feel as though we're kind of behind the trend because we're drawing influences from people who the music world would have drawn their influences from a decade ago, maybe. That makes sense?
Yeah, no, I know
So I feel as though
exactly.
there's a world in which musical theatre people will be much more progressive as a whole, but if you're working within that world, to be progressive is not actually to be as progressive as you might like.
Yeah.
It's difficult to see musical theatre ever being progressive, at least in its broadest, more conservative sense.
Yes.
I'm going to say something that's almost sacrilegious until Stephen Sondheim dies. The world is still caught in the prism of his work.
Yeah, and again, I think the question I keep on getting confused by, and I should read some books about it because I don't really know the answer, is just I just want to know more about Sondheim in his 20s and 30s and what it was like to be him. Like, how different did he... how people perceived him at that time. That's something that I find very interesting.
Because it took him quite a while to get recognition for what he was doing.
As in right now, it's difficult to imagine a world without him, but I'm just curious. It's the same thing with Steve Reich, who's like my kind of favourite composer, and a similar point in his late 30s where he was making the big things. I wanted to know whether he was aware he was doing something really big before then.
Yeah.
Does anyone really know they're doing it until it's been judged to be big, though?
Oh, exactly.
I mean, are you actually the, you may be an architect, but if no one lives in your house, are you genuinely an architect?
There we go.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a laboured statement, isn't it? So bring us back to Guy then.
Yes.
So, you were talking about the collaborative process and how that affected both the music and the narrative. When did you have a sense that it sort of cohered into something you were both more or less, nothing's ever finished, but, when was it more or less ready in a way that you were happy to take it further?
The deadline of needing it to be ready.
Your deadline writer is marvellous.
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, I don't think we ever would feel 100% satisfied until... But I also think when you have a realistic, kind of tangible prospect of getting it performed, and you get a sense of who's going to be performing it and where it will be performed, that really helps do the icing on the cake of the writing. And I don't think that process ends until that has really all come together.
Because one thing that... for Guy that was interesting was just the under music. Like, we would have never written under music if you didn't have a performance lined up, but that's actually now a really integral part of the show, the way that the under music is actually something that threads the dialogue with the songs and creates this kind of slick unity.
We were talking, weren't we, about when did you think it got to a point of cohering?
Yes, absolutely.
And when did you think you reached that point of coherence?
I think it was...
You said deadline, but when was that?
So that was
early May. But the truth is, I think we actually thought we got that earlier. I think we thought we got there when we secured this this venue back in February, March. I think I'd done a recent draft of the show. You'd done a lot of music, and we felt as though, there's a couple more songs to do and a bit more script working. I think we thought we got it there, but then we just redrafted it. We shared it with friends, and we got some feedback, and we redrafted it again. That has some implications for some songs. So I think what you said about it never ending is very much true, and I think the purpose of a performance at this stage is to give it an endpoint, just so you can see what it is like in a real sense, because you can just keep going and going and going forever, not necessarily making it better after a certain point.
Although the audience themselves are the final speech marks critics, or dramaturgs, actually. I mean, the audience will tell you what they think.
Yes.
Because you'll see they'll see things that they like more than you thought were there. Perhaps.
Exactly, yeah.
And vice versa, I'm afraid to say, so you will make changes, presumably, and you have already, because you've already opened.
Yeah.
Before we get onto that, then, I would just like briefly to explore, because I'm really fascinated with this idea of that people think of creativity as being in a garret. You write in your garret, untouched by the real world, and then you produce your goods, and there it is. I suppose that's the idea of the novel still riding very heavily in British culture in terms of creative culture. But the idea that actually it's about booking a venue and then getting your cast and then actually tweaking and twiddling, and the idea that might be part of the creative process is fascinating to me. And the only parallel I can think of that is oddly improvised musicals. I've spoken to a large number of musical improvisers, showstoppers and people like that.
Sure.
And they all say that bit they do at the beginning, the shout to the audience, and I'm sure you've both been, you ask the audience to, what is our context, what is the year, give us an idea. It makes it sound like you're being amazing because you're having to take on board these random ideas, or seemingly random ideas, but of course what it's really doing is it's actually narrowing the field of play, because actually a completely blank slate with no suggestions at all is almost impossible to do. But the moment someone says, right, you're in revolutionary France, you've suddenly narrowed it right down to one period, and suddenly ideas start bumping into your head.
Yes.
It seems you were working creatively together up to that point, but the booking of the place and then all the logistical stuff does feed into the creative process. That is what you're saying, but I'm so fascinated, because obviously if and when the show is revived by other people in 10 years' time, that won't be the same, because it'll be a finished product. So suddenly the infrastructural inputs will have been taken out of its creative pot, but the results will still be there. I'm sort of talking about this and thinking about it at the same time, hence my waffle.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I feel like...
What do you think?
Well, it feels like the product is still in flux currently. Now we're still sort of getting to grips with it, and this is just the first run of it, and I think so much of that is informed by, at the end of the run of performances, seeing what we have found to work and what hasn't worked, and it could go in any number of directions, and I think it often it's just pot luck, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I definitely think that the show is different because, say, the specific cast, like when you're writing a show and still finishing it, and then you do your casting, and then a couple of weeks later you have to send it to them. You've got that couple of weeks to shift the script so that it fits the characters.
Yeah, you rewrote a lot of the script for the actors.
They were really curious. They were like, "This kind of sounds like me."
It does now.
Exactly. But I think that's great, because it adds that the kind of last level of reality to them. You've got your main character, but you can add those little details of people. But even I agree. Even now, like, ultimately, this is a first workshop of the piece, and you see what jokes land, and I guess you probably see what melodies work.
Yeah, absolutely. You see what, because a lot of the thing with the music that we're using, it's I'm taking cues from musical artists who don't write for theatre.
Yeah.
So working out how that music and how those melodies work in a dramatic context it's a tough process, and it's still something I'm experimenting with. And you definitely find that certain moments work better than others. Certain melody types work better than others.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Even from the contemporary scene.
Even from the sort of from the contemporary. If you look into the contemporary pop music scene, there's so many different kind of subgenres out there, and I want to draw on as many of them as possible. But just working out, because in a lot of cases they're very different. They're very distant from the sort of traditional musical theatre sound world, and that can take quite a bit of accustoming to, for me and the performers. So.
Yeah, I think for every kind of subgenre of contemporary music, there's a different genre of show that style of music could be used to tell. Like, one thing that I get sad by is when I see really cool contemporary stories using a sound world which I don't think was the right sound world for that show.
I see that all the time.
Exactly,
in every
and
possible
like,
direction.
So I get that when you're like writing a show about World War One, you might want to use like a more historical sound world, but when you're writing a show about like modern life, it seems a shame not to. So, for example, there's a gym scene in here in Guy, and it would be a shame not to be using the sorts of music that you listen to in a gym. Yeah. And there's what else is there? Trying to kind of find modern music that really picks. And there's a game we sort of play where any piece of music will be like, what story would that song have been good to tell? And you realise that contemporary music is so dramatic, and some of our favourite songs recently, it's just like we're almost annoyed that we didn't write them so we could put them in the story because they belong in narratives.
Yeah, and often there's a lot. I mean, it can also be, yes, there's the brighter side of pop, but you can also get much darker sounds than you'd normally expect from musical theatre, and I don't know, just more emotionally raw sounds, if that doesn't sound too vague. But I just think there's a much bigger gamut of kind of emotional worlds out there if you're drawing on all these influences.
The song that we were writing today is interesting because it was meant to be a villain song, and so I'd been thinking it was like going to be this kind of like a classic villain song in my head, and then you came up with a song which was much more, because it was drawing on some really interesting pop influences, it was a much more interesting psychological twisted take on a villain.
Oh right, yeah.
Because
this wasn't for Guy, this was for something else.
A different song, yeah.
So more drama, less melodrama, in fact.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Because there's so much nuance in contemporary pop, and it's got probably this reputation of just being cheesy songs that are on the radio, but that's just the tip of the iceberg.
I'm not actually sure it does. I mean, obviously, looking at it from my grand old age, modern pop appears to be almost invisible, actually. You know, you see a few names, it seems to be attached to names rather than genre so much. I know that's not true, but actually, you know, to a typical theatre-going middle-aged man, middle-class man, whatever you want, I'm guilty, sorry, but... you know, I can recognise pop songs when I hear them in the broadest sense, but actually when people say cheesy pop, actually I think 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah, sure. Interesting, yeah.
Whereas actually, when I think of music these days, funny enough, I think of the music related to online gaming.
Yeah, and that's got its own sound world, which would be amazing to draw upon at some point.
Yeah,
we both very much want to do some sort of...
So that's the show after next.
Yes. Yeah, the adaptation of those. Yeah, yes, please.
So, Guy arrived here at the Bunker in London, where it is for a little bit longer and also going on tour. But, as you say, you've used the word workshop, which of course it isn't, but will have that effect in some senses because it's the first public landing of it in some senses.
Exactly.
So, what have you learned from it? What has landed? What hasn't landed? And what has surprised you? Multiple choice question, you see?
Good question. Stephen, go on.
What has surprised us? I think what has surprised us is, I think, how different the response has been from people depending on what background they come from or what kind of angle they're looking at it from. I think lots of different areas of the show have been held up for praise or criticism respectively, and there's not been any consistency in that. So I think what surprised me the most is the fact that everyone seemed to have a different angle and a different opinion and a different perspective.
So you can legitimately say engaging.
Yeah, exactly.
People are engaging with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one review will say that the book is great, but the music's disappointment. Another review will say that the music worked brilliantly, but the book didn't work. And it's just been amazing how back and forth that's been.
It's fascinating.
I think that's the thing that surprised me the most. In terms of what's working, I think all of the aspects of the show for me have if they're not working already, have the potential to work with a bit more, sort of with a few more rewrites.
On the right track.
Yeah, they're on the right track. But I think it's often just if people can see what we're trying to do, it makes a lot more sense. But I think if people can't, if people come in expecting a traditional musical, I think that has been a real kind of that's just sort of, I think, either they've thought, oh wow, this is a game changer, or they've thought this is just naff, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I think
very honest, by the way, it's marvellous. But it's
I think it's for me it's very interesting because I always thought, because I mean a lot of the subgenres we're using in Guy are quite quite poppy, quite kind of I thought they had a lot of mass appeal, but I guess I find it quite surprising that some people just feel that they don't work in the fabric of the drama. A few people have thought that, not everyone, but I guess it's a bit of a teething process.
The main thing are just like specific moments. So some jokes don't land, and I want to switch. The dramaturgy in the middle section, I want to just kind of shake up. The truth is, actually, I'd forgotten this, but we never actually intended this story to be the final one, because this is a 90-minute version and for 4 characters, and we'd initially written it for 6 characters in a full-length 2.5 version, and we cut out a really kind of key subplot. So in many ways, we had to kind of squash it down a little bit, and I can see how there's a particular aftertaste which some people are finding distasteful in the resolution of one of the subplots.
Right. There's still a scar in the narrative that needs
exactly, and in my head I'm saying
away.
That's only because we had this little
Yeah.
we had to make it short, but it's in a sense it's a really useful comment just to know that I think that the eventual plot will actually solve that. In terms of learning, I definitely agree with Stephen about the difference in reviews, because on the one hand we'll read them and we'll find ourselves swinging back and forward between a person gets it, this person doesn't. But because they don't agree with each other, you realise that actually we're doing something interesting because the discourse around it isn't consistent. Yeah. No one knows how to write electronic pop musicals because no one's particularly doing it. So I think both of us I think we were happy just to be honest about the fact that we're trying to do something kind of experimental, but also aiming at being popular.
I completely agree with you, Leoe, that I think that the process is kind of experimental, and it's not very largely trodden ground, and so I think we're learning a lot on the job about what is going to be really intuitive musical theatre and what's going to take a bit longer to work out. And I think every project we are learning new things about how our style can work dramatically, and I think that for me that's the number one thing that's most important, is how can what we're bringing to musical theatre make sense dramatically, not only make sense but be compelling dramatically. And I think we're always discovering ways in which it can and ways in which we need to work on it. And I think,
And just kind of thinking over the last few months about the choices we've made about how to tell this story, I'm kind of remembering that we're constantly trying to make the not obvious choice. So in terms of the style of music, in terms of the way that we tell a gay story, in terms of the way that my dialogue works, in each one I feel as though we've made the non-conventional choice, which means that some people get it and some people don't. And I think for us there's a really exciting process right now, just skin thickening and becoming very defined that we want a certain thing to exist, which is a certain type of musical theatre.
Your voice, in fact.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I think it's a really good confidence-giving process.
Absolutely. And we're working on that, and we're not going to give up on that voice, are we? No.
And you're right to make that observation, and you see this particularly in Edinburgh and places like that, where there's a lot of I'm going to say citizen reviewing, and I do that myself, of course. You know, that's what this is essentially in many ways. Well, it certainly is in Edinburgh. But there's what you learn very quickly is that actually there's an awful lot of people out there who want everything to conform to their worldview rather than want to go in and have their worldview challenged.
Absolutely,
positively, shall we say.
So true.
And so you're quite right that when it comes to reviews, you're lucky to have more than one actually. So the fact you've got a number to pick from means that you can fish and select and fill it, and there's a lot of fish-related stuff there, isn't there? But you can draw from it what you need to, and what you think is valid, because the only people who judge on what's valid or not is the two of you within the context of your voice, because actually, I know I'm telling you what you know, but it's nice occasionally to hear it, I think, that actually every review is one person's opinion.
Exactly. We love reviewing the reviews.
Yeah, that's right. You need to send feedback back.
Exactly.
So, but you are essentially pleased.
Yes.
We're
100%.
so pleased. Yeah.
This show we began in November, and it's the fact that it exists now is, and there's so much that we're proud on it. I think the opening the first 15-20 minutes, I think in the future we will keep on going back to the way that the first 20 minutes of this operates, in terms of just the slickness of it, the way that you have
under music reaching out into songs and just sort of weaving in dramatically.
So organic and unusually.
I wish I could let people know that you're both making kind of sort of swirly moves. You're using your bodies in a very expressive way, which is absolutely fascinating, by the way, to express that kind of organic, as you were saying, interweaving, intermeshing. You know, it seems to be fusion is very much what we're talking about here with each other, and of course within the narrative and musical plot points of the song. The piece.
Well, there's one interesting question that a few people have raised, which is one thing I don't think we'll ever budge on, is people have been like, why haven't you got a live band? Which is... Well, do you want to you have strong feelings about this?
Oh, well, I think a lot of people have assumed that the fact we use a backing track is because we don't have a budget to have a live band. But my response to that would be, I mean, a lot of the tracks in this use about 25 different multi-tracks. So why would we have a live band to produce that when we can craft that before the show?
Exactly.
Also, contemporary pop doesn't work like that.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
when you watch Top of the Pops from the 60s and 70s, yes, there's a band in the background.
Sure. Yeah.
Because that's the old, I have to say, it's the old jazz model from the 20s and 30s.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
not where we are now. That,
And I
you know,
think-
Yeah.
I don't know. When the 1980s landed,
Yeah.
Everything started moving. At least there was a series of options. You don't have to do it one way, but that takes us back to the early point, doesn't it? That
Yeah.
people are expecting it to conform with their worldview.
Absolutely,
Exactly.
and I think people assumed that any kind of mixing issues we might have, it just simply because we don't have a live band. But actually, yes, mixing it live is difficult, but it's part of the challenge. And we certainly wouldn't want to forego on the kind of quality you can get with electronic music by making it all live.
And I think that the reason that slickness or this kind of organicism is hand in hand with the electronic thing is you can pre-plan things. You don't have to. What we would like to do is create musical theatre which has that, just the control and the everything happening exactly to the second where it should. And hopefully what you'll find...
Micromanaging us.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure you've got loops and beds, however, to make the whole thing work when people do speak slower today. Performance 2
Exactly.
days ago.
We do,
Yeah, that's right.
And
Actors, eh?
I feel like if you're expecting a band, then... Yeah, if it's meant to have a band, then backing track, not good.
Go and see Five Guys named Mo if you want backing.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. So I think that there's a different type of musical theatre which is being developed, which will be only because you don't have a band.
Oh
You'll
yeah,
have new
and
possibilities.
there's nothing wrong with the live band, and the live band adds so much
The marriage of Kim K was
absolutely, yeah.
huge, was
So that
a really big
we're not
band.
going to have a problem with it, but I just think for the kind of music we're trying to write, it's not appropriate.
Yeah. But you've made that decision. You know what is right for you, and you have decided that's the way you're going to do it.
Absolutely,
Fine.
yeah.
That's exactly as it should be.
Yeah.
Fine. I really wouldn't. If people are criticising the logistics, which is essentially what that is of your show, then they haven't actually got anything to say.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. That's not about the show at all, is it?
And that's actually very interesting, is to, when people say things about your show, you work out what is a decision and what's a mistake.
Yeah.
And that's a really nice...
That's a very good observation, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely really is.
Yeah.
It's a nice distinction, in fact.
Yeah.
To use the
Secretly-
other version of nice.
I know I'm not showing it on my face, but I'm actually very proud of it right now.
Well, there's also a lot of wit in the words. I mean, there's a song, isn't there, called Click?
That's right,
Which in a show about trying to click with someone via internet means or otherwise, I think, that's just beautiful, neat little bits of... That immediately leapt out at me when I was looking at it. So I thought, there's nice stuff going on here already.
I think so. I think when we first started working together on this musical called Q, you suddenly realised how
A
fond I
coffee
am.
shop musical.
That's the one.
Yeah.
You realise how fond I am of my little internet metaphors. But again, I just think in terms of language, like there's so many words that exist in our language that have a... Writers can take them on a journey. We can metaphoricize them, and I think it's really nice with Click and with other songs like that to be putting those words into context that
Or add meaning layers, etc.
Exactly.
Et cetera,
Yeah.
Also, an audience likes to feel they're being smart too.
Yeah, absolutely.
As do reviewers, it turns out.
Yeah.
Now, we're actually recording this as you've already opened in London, but you're doing that rather marvellous thing. You've got London dates and non-London dates, and indeed you're both non-London, you're a non-London company, aren't you? Manchester, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Yes. Which is, if you like, a home of music in its own right.
Oh,
Indeed,
yeah,
culture
100%,
as well.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So, how can people see Guy, a new musical, either in London or elsewhere?
Your best bet is to go to our website, which is www.leoeandhyde.com/guy.
I'm going to ask you to spell that, just because
Sure.
it's not the standard spelling.
No, it is not. It is Leoe and A-N-D, Hyde, Hyde, .com/guy. Or the simple way for memory is to go to our Twitter account, which is @GuyTheMusical, and just follow some links from there.
Perfect. But where are you going that isn't just London?
We're going to Manchester, Buxton and Birmingham.
So it was K's earlier, it's B's now.
Exactly.
Yeah. And how can people contact you? What's your... It's the
Yes.
Leoe and Hyde website is still the best place to go for that?
Exactly. Or just message us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We have accounts both at Guy the Musical and Leoe and Hyde.
Lovely. So my last question for the two of you, and you may confer or you can come up with separate answers, is when the dust has settled, at least on this iteration of Guy, what are you going to take away from it, personally?
What do we
Thinking
go-
time, I like it.
I think each show that we do we understand more and more the importance of dramaturgs and workshops. And I'm very impatient. I have an idea and I want to make it happen ASAP. And I think that one of the best things that happened before this show that we didn't have in the Manager of Kim K, which is that we had a few read-throughs, and I think this show is a lot stronger dramaturgically because of it. And I think we feel this major urgency because we feel as though we've got ideas to get out there, and I think the confidence to take things slower is something that we'll learn hopefully over time.
I think I'd completely agree with that, actually. I think that works for both the dramaturgy of the story, but also the music and working with singers and seeing how things settle in people's voices. I think just workshopping and letting a project have a long lifespan and a collaborative lifespan with lots of different artists, I think is the best way.
It's lovely, if you don't mind me saying, to hear not just about the journey of the show, but then about the journey of the writers and the composers. Actually, the very fact that you know that you haven't yet finished your own personal development, or rather, you will change and mould as contemporary times do as well, but still learning, because there's an awful lot of people in this world who say, I've learned that, now I'm just going to write shows.
Well,
They're now already out of date.
Stephen likes to remind me that I have this thing about people using their authority to say things as opposed to just... I like the idea when I meet somebody who is just using ideas to prove their point as opposed to the fact that they have a degree in something or something like that. Yeah, it really means a lot to me.
Well, it's the old thing about power as well, isn't it? You can be appointed you can be appointed to a post, but then you have to be elected to it afterwards. I don't mean through the systems, I just mean by popular consent.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure talking to both of you.
It's been a pleasure for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I look forward to hearing more about this show, but also your future work, so please do stay in touch.
Thank you very much.
If you're alive.
What's confusing me? Can you sing to me? Like I know the sound of your voice. Okay, I'm counting down for you. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Alright, so how are you? So she knows him. And why are you calling?
Shouldn't do what?
No, I'm so married.
You're not going anywhere. I'll lock you away.
I see, so what you're saying when you speak of freedom, you believe in freedom for you, not for me. Driveway, a 7 for Kanye. Oh fuck, oh fucking shit, is this a joke? Oh Jesus Christ, what the fuck's he doing back? I was an absolute bliss. He'll be super suspicious when he sees me like
twice, please. Which should fall tonight, please.
Oh my God, where is my phone? Somewhere here. If Chris finds my phone, he'll write down and apply.
And there we are, as promised earlier, some of the songs from The Marriage of Kim K, that show which was such a success for Leoe and Stephen. But if you want to go and see Guy, you can. And the best way of finding out about it is, as they said, www.leoandhyde.com/Guy. And remember, Leo here is Leoe. And just a reminder, in June and July it's playing at the Bunker Theatre, which is in London, under the Menier Theatre. It's their new studio space. It's also playing at the Pavilion Arts Centre in Buxton on the 12th of July, the Blue Orange Theatre in Birmingham on the 14th of July, and 532 in Manchester on the 11th and the 13th of July. So, if you can, give it a whirl. And for those of us who aren't particularly interested in football, and I can't help but notice there's been quite a lot of it around recently, musical theatre is a fantastic diversion. And it's slightly easier to get seats at the moment. So if you're really not into watching 22 men kick a pig's bladder around a field in Russia, then go off and find something wonderful in a fringe theatre near you. Or better yet, make plans to come to the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. It's now within spitting distance. However, I think for the time being it's best if I now sign off. And I only know one really effective way of doing that. Actually, I do know two, but one will be career-ending, so I won't be using those words. I'm going to go for the one I like most, and that's goodbye. And here's how I normally say it. Goodbye. See? So consistent. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright 2018, except for the songs, where the copyright remains with Leoe Mercer and Stephen Hyde. And my thanks to them for allowing me to play some of their songs in this episode. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos. I've not been to the bunker, it's relatively new, last year, isn't it?
Yeah, it's only about a year and a half old.
It has that Edinburgh smell.
Yes.
That kind of vaulty.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yes.
Yeah. I know, I love it. I think it's a great little venue. Apparently it used to be an old car park.
Oh, it was a car park below ground?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Okay.
Yeah. So are you getting up to Edinburgh this year then?
I am, of course, yeah. This will be my 12th year on the trot, to be honest.
Yeah.
Gosh, a microphone sneeze.
Yeah.
You were up there last year with the show about loneliness and emptiness. I can't remember what
The Inevitable Quiet of the Crash.
Thank you very much.
That's right, yes. Yeah, that's right, yeah. We were there with Kim K as well.
Yes, of course,
Yeah.
which is that's really the thing from which your reputation is hanging, I think, at the moment.
And I think
Very honest, by the way. It's marvellous. But it's
I think it's for me it's very interesting because I always thought a lot of the kind of
God is telling us not to be honest.
yeah.
I am angry.
I think
2 stars.
So I think both of us we were happy just to be honest about the fact that we're trying to do something kind of experimental, but also aiming at being popular. And
I thought he was dead, by the way.
He's making it very clearly known that he's not. Yeah, absolutely, definitely. But I think
Coming in.
yeah, sure.
It's just a mad variance, isn't it? It's full on or nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah. All or nothing. That's a bit like me and Leah. We're all or nothing, aren't we? Really?
I'm all your nothing.
West End or go home. Yeah.